Bears fans, we are so back. I think. Are we back? We'll talk about it this week on Bear Era. Welcome back to Bear Era. Ciaran, the Bears hit bottom, or at least I hope they did, and bounced off a little bit. How did that feel? How you doing after the Packers game?
I feel conflicted after the Packers game because I should feel terrible because the way that the Bears lost that game, and as a Bears fan, you should feel awful. Like even on Sunday, I thought that once it happened, and I'm gonna full disclosure, when we were about to kick that, I'm like, he's gonna miss, and in my head, I was like, we ain't winning this game. I don't know what it was. It was probably the Cody Parkey double dunk that just came back to me again, but I didn't feel confident at that time. But it didn't hurt like the Commanders one did, and I had people saying, "Oh, but it's against the rival." I'm like, yeah, but because we lost to the Patriots the previous week, I'm like, the season's going nowhere anyway. So I wasn't really hurt that much. It would have been nice to beat the Packers, but it didn't happen. I was content enough because the Bears should have won, and they should have won because of the most important player on the team, and that's Caleb Williams, and he was able to bounce back despite everything that happened, despite having to change play callers, like going through it, like there was reports that were out that he kind of stood up in front of the team and kind of apologized for his role in it, which I don't think he needs to be doing because it's not his fault. Like at the end of the day, he's a rookie, he's learning. But what I was happy about from the game is just we saw the developments kind of get back on track, which I think is the most important thing right now. Because look, the Bears aren't making the playoffs because they lost the critical games that they needed to win in the middle of the season. And that's why right now it's about, you need to see development from the guys you know are going to be here past this season. And we got to see that from Caleb. I think we saw development from Roma Dunze as well. I thought he had a good game, and some of the other playmakers. And I think that was important. While I always want the Bears to win, I wasn't completely devastated when they lost the game like I normally would be. And I think that's just because of the context of the season right now.
Yeah, no such thing as moral victories in the NFL, but we expected them to play a whole lot worse. And the fact that they were competitive and had a chance to win the game at the end was unexpected. Would we rather have seen them win the game? Of course, it's versus the Packers. Were we completely devastated that they lost that game? I don't want to go with completely devastated. Disappointed, yes, but there was a lot to take away from the day, as you said. And speaking of developments, yes, Caleb Williams, especially in the final drive, looked like a guy that you're going to be able to lean an offense on in the NFL, and that is by far the biggest deal. In other positive developments this week, welcome to everybody who's joined us, and there are a lot of you. We are over 700 subscribers now. Thank you so much for liking, commenting, subscribing. Stay with us. We're going to have Bears coverage for you all season here on Bear Era. We're working to make this one of the best Bears podcasts available, period, and we are happy to have you along with us. We also have a bunch of other folks with us, primary partners in Blue Wire Podcasts, where you can hear all of our audio podcasts, and Homage Clothing, who is keeping the team looking great all year with their very soft t-shirts and hoodies. Holiday season's coming up. If you buy anything using the QR code link on the screen, we get a slice of that, and it's the best way to support the podcast right now. So thank you to those partners. With that, we're going to slide into the season summary. Bears are 4-6, although it feels like maybe could have been quite a bit better than that. Not the end of the world, but also, as we said, not the most important thing. Caleb developing is by far the critical storyline in Chicago. The upcoming schedule is tough. Vikings, Lions, and Niners. Bears showed some real fight versus the Packers, which I think gives them a much better outlook moving into these games. We'll be talking with our guest today, the great Tim Jenkins, about the changes he saw in the change to OC with Thomas Brown taking over for the departed Shane Waldron and why that made such a difference. But it was just great to see an offense that was functional, threatening an opponent. That's not a place we've been for most of the year. So baby steps, Chicago Bears fans. We took some big ones and some little ones. It didn't add up to a win, but that doesn't mean it was all in vain. That brings us to top trio. Ciaran's going to give his focus for the week first. I'll give mine after that. And then, of course, we will have the aforementioned Tim Jenkins and answer one of your fan questions of the week. So what's your focus going into this Vikings game, coming out of a Packers game that looked like rabbit out of the hat, could have been a win, didn't end up that way, but now, there are no breaks in the NFL. You get to go against Kevin O'Connell's Vikings with Sam Darnold and Brian Flores. What are you looking at?
Yeah, what's new with the Bears where they lose a game that they should have won? But no, that is not my focus this week. My focus this week is going to be on the offense because it's not so much that it's just Caleb played better or it's kind of getting away from Shane Waldron, but I do think a big thing is Thomas Brown. He only took the reins of this offense on Tuesday last week, which again, so very Bears that they didn't just make a decision very quickly and allow him a full week of practice, but albeit that's what happened, but we saw some improvement. Like, they didn't beat the Packers, but the reality is that they should have beat the Packers because you make smart decisions at the end of that game and you win. Like, I think, I want to say 99 times out of 100, but I actually just think 31 of 32 teams in that situation probably win that game. So unfortunately, we are the team that doesn't happen with because we make mistakes when it comes to the end of these games, but it is what it is. But I feel positive about the offense because Caleb Williams basically put the team on his back and he deserved to win that game. And it wasn't just because Caleb Williams looked like a superstar or that he couldn't do anything wrong, because he made mistakes in that game, but you saw him when things broke down, he used his legs. He got the smart play. Like, he was still doing what he has been doing in terms of trying to read the field. But the difference is, I think Thomas Brown just made it that a little bit easier for him because he made him be able to make quick decisions. I've been asking for this for 10 weeks. The fact that we finally saw motion on the offense, which I was like screaming at my TV for pretty much every single game, except for the game that I was in London for, and I was still screaming about there being no pre-snap motion. And the players do have to get used to it because there were still too many penalties on that, but they need to do better there. But we're seeing what Thomas Brown did was he got the ball in the hands of his playmakers. He got the ball to DJ more early and often. He got Rama Dunze on in the game. He got Cole Kmet in the game. He got Keenan Allen in the game. He had a good mix of DeAndre Swift, but Roshan Johnson as well, especially in key situations. Something that we've been asking for a long time. But the biggest thing for me is, and the playbook is, I don't think there's a problem with the actual offense and the plays that are in the playbook. I always said it was the way Waldron was calling the plays. One, was not helping Caleb Williams, but two is it seemed like plays are being called in isolation and nothing was setting up for later on in the game, or there was nothing that was linking one play to another. And that's something that I think we actually did see from Thomas Brown. I didn't see as many stupid plays, I'll say, where you're just sitting on your couch and being like, why did he call that? Like, there was always going to be plays that didn't work, but you understood the rationale behind it. And that's what I think is going to be really, really good. Is like the key focus from now is, can Caleb Williams continue to step up as more things get thrown at him, as he comes up against some tough defenses. But what we have to say is, against the Packers, who was his first divisional game, against your bitter rival, if we're being completely honest, like, he looked like the better of the two quarterbacks in terms of Jordan Love had it pretty easy in terms of he had more time because the Bears were not able to get home, and he still made more mistakes than I think Caleb did. But Caleb was accurate. He goes 23 of 31, 231 yards. Yeah, there's no passing touchdowns, but he was good with the ball. He spread it around. You had Adunze with 65 yards. You had DJ Moore with 62. You had Komet with 42. You had Allen with 41. That's what you want to see. You don't want to see a team where it's the whole offense has to go through DJ Moore, and if DJ Moore gets locked down, the offense can't do anything. I think that's what is really good to see, is that you're seeing development in terms of the offense, getting the ball in the hands of the different playmakers, not just one or the other, but also it's making it that much easier for a rookie because he's having to deal with a lot. And some of the decisions that Waldron was making, I was just looking at it. I'm like, this is just, it's not good planning for a rookie that needs to be eased into things where you can throw a lot at him in terms of his pre-snap stuff, his protections, ID in the mic, all that sort of stuff, which Caleb has done a good job at. But if you're telling him to stay in the pocket no matter what, and then the pocket breaks down, he's getting sacked 9 times a game, that doesn't help anyone. I think Caleb Williams probably picked up about 5 or 6 first downs just because things broke down. And he used his legs, which he's able to do. And what we saw from that is the Packers actually, that's why they weren't able to get home as much, because they started to worry about Caleb Williams getting out. And then that created more space for guys where Caleb then felt very confident. Like at the end, that last drive, like you can, I will say it's, and I said this at the time, the balls of steel on Caleb Williams for some of those throws, that he makes a mistake and the game is over. But he didn't care. He felt confident in it. I think everyone's going to remember the 4th down play where he's screaming at Eberflus that he wants to go for it. He goes for it and he makes a play. And that's what you want to see from a rookie, where despite the, I would say, like unfortunate situation that he's in, that it's basically your head coach is probably getting fired at the end of the season, he's making the most out of it and he's getting to develop. And I guess the one thing that I'll be looking forward to against the Vikings is how many passing yards does he get? Because I think it's if he gets around 176 or 178 yards, he breaks the rookie record, which we knew that was going to happen, but it's still good to see. And it'll be good for him to see because he's had a lot of downs over the last couple of weeks, and that will be a nice kind of little get up for him. And I hope he has a good game against the Vikings to go along with that.
Be a nice way to see the progress continue. I'm with you that a lot of the fixes, if we want to call them that on offense, because they did fix the offense functionally, were little things, a little bit of motion. I have a feeling Thomas Brown sat down with Caleb during the week and said, hey, if you don't see it 2.5 beats in, go for it. Take off. Like you're mine for 2.5 seconds. After that, I don't want you to just stay in and go down with the ship. Like that hurts our offense. It's way better if you don't see anything at 2.5 beats, get moving. And we saw it early in the game. And like you said, it had an effect on the outcome as the game went along because drives got sustained. Green Bay had to start to account for it. That pulls defenders into, wider spaces. That means bigger windows to throw the ball into at the end of the game. So the Bears righted the ship versus the Packers. Make no mistake. This was a team in free fall, and they pushed a playoff contender to the limit. Caleb had a great, I don't want to call it game-winning drive because that's not how it ended up. But outside of kicking the ball, Caleb did everything he needed to do in the fourth quarter to put his team at home in a position to win in what was a really big game. If they had absolutely just burned out during this game, come up with like 9 total points and lost badly to Green Bay, it would be even louder. It would be internally loud at Hallis Hall this week. And instead, everybody's talking about, oh, look, we've got a pretty good football team and they can play football against a quality opponent. Next up for me is maintaining that consistency, taking everything you did this week, continuing to do it. That's the consistency part. And then building on top of it, do some of the things that you did miss. As you said, Caleb did make some mistakes. So if they can continue all the strengths from last week and hit some of the basics they missed. Check downs, open mid-route combos that he didn't see, which is expected of a rookie, but there were some missed throws there. And then tackling versus the run. It wasn't that the Packers had a ton of rushing yards, but their average per rush was pretty darn good. And they had some explosives there, and some of those came down to not making the tackle when they could have at the line. So those are basics. Another one is playing the deep ball with more consistency. If just one of those throws to Watson ends up on the turf, instead he ends up with 4 catches for 150 yards. If any one of those balls hits the turf, Green Bay probably doesn't win this game. It was that tight a game. Came down to a blocking a potential game-winning field goal for them to win. They're going to have those opportunities, and telling you what, JJ's better than Watson. So you're going to need that consistency, or else it's going to come back to bite you. Got to stay aggressive to the end of the game. Didn't see that last week. There's been a lot made of that. Eberflus was asked about it in the press conference. My biggest takeaway was nothing that we saw from the Bears or nothing that Eberflus said. But as you know, I cover the whole league, and watching the coaches that earned victories on Sunday by being aggressive in the final minutes was more impressive to me. Watching Sean McDermott say, if we let Kansas City and Pat Mahomes hang around, they are going to beat us. I don't care how much time's left on the clock. We need to score. And in fact, we probably need 7 here, not 3. Like, we should not be settling. We should be pushing it. And then Josh Allen goes and does alien Josh Allen things. It was the aggressive coaches that won. And lots of coaches, not just Eberflus around the NFL, talking about not losing the game, right? Well, there's the potential for us to fumble. There's the potential. You saw the Chargers in a very similar situation. They handed the ball off to J.K. Dobbins. They didn't expect a loss during that play. They expected at least a small gain, and they were certainly not thinking about a fumble. That's not why you hand off to your back in the NFL, thinking, well, he's probably going to fumble. So playing it safe isn't going to win you the game all the time, just like playing aggressive isn't going to win you the game all the time. But I would rather see this team push it and stay aggressive. I think their chances are better if they do that than if they just sort of turtle up at the end of the game and say, okay, we're going to take the quote unquote higher percentage play, which then gets blocked, and you end up with a loss. So if they can do all that, if they can follow that script, there's the potential here to steal one. Not saying it's likely, it's a tall order. It's going to be very difficult to do all that. If it was easy, everybody would do it every week in the NFL. But I would rather see him follow that script and give the Vikings another game and be right down to the final play against a team that is clearly viewed as superior to them right now. That would be the best possible result.
The whole thing with that decision and hearing about Eberflus and trying to play the percentages, it doesn't make a lot of sense to a lot of people, because when you look at the percentages, the percentage that you're going to fumble the ball there was at something like 0.75% that you would fumble the ball there. The difference between, I think it was 4 or 5 yards, is Carlos Santos kicking the ball at a 75% clip versus him kicking it at a 96% clip. So it's like, it doesn't make a lot of sense, except for the fact that it shows the head coach doesn't trust the players and doesn't trust them to get it done. And again, that could be a reason for the disconnect right now within the organization, and ultimately will be a reason why there will be change at the end of the year. And you would think at some stage, the way some of these losses have come, you're kind of playing with house money. You may as well just go be aggressive and try and win the football game instead of trying to be conservative. There was no reason to be conservative. It's a risk and reward league, and if you don't want to risk it, you don't get rewarded with victories. And that's what the Bears need to look at moving forward. And I'd imagine the players want that as well, because they don't want this feeling. They want to win these games, and they should have won that game. They deserve to win that game, but ultimately one mistake cost them, and that just shows you how close it is to win and lose in this league.
Scared money don't make money, and that's the way that you can't call a football game. And I think your point about the players is well taken, because if I'm the running back and you're like, well, we don't want to run it because we're afraid we're going to fumble the ball, you're saying I'm not good at my job. The thing you pay me to do, the thing that I do very reliably, for the rest of the time. Suddenly, with the game on the line, you don't look at me and say, go make a play. I need you to get 4 yards no matter what, right? As a player, that's exciting to me. Going, I'm going to take the ball out of your hands. You might fumble it, and I just don't think I could handle that, right? I'm like, coach, what are you talking about? I haven't fumbled in the last, 50, 60, 70, 100, 150 carries. What are we talking about here? That's, again, a very small chance, as opposed to saying, go out and execute, do your job. Like, don't coach scared. And that's what that was. It was coaching scared. Yeah. Speaking of coaching, obviously a lot of the fan question of the week submissions this week had to do with coaching. We certainly picked one of those. This one from Elliot Coriath. Elliot, thanks for your question. Say that Eberflus is fired in January. Say that he is, because it's probably happening. And Poles, he's not going anywhere, hires an offensive play caller as a head coach. If the offense continues to improve, does Brown, Thomas Brown that is, stick around as an OC or a coach? Ciaran, I'll give you first crack.
Nope.
Why not? I agree, but why not?
Honestly, the reason why he doesn't, and look, the Bears offense could look good because they have some talented guys there, and this offense could start clicking over the next couple of weeks, and there'll be people saying that, oh, he should stay. And I said this last week on the podcast that I wouldn't be surprised that if we're talking about this in 3 or 4 years' time, that Thomas Brown becomes a head coach somewhere, but just not right now, because I think the players do respect him, all that sort of stuff. But whether it's offensive, defensive, a special teams guy that comes in here, I want them to be able to build the staff that they want. I don't want to have to force a guy. It's different if you have a top 5 defensive or offensive coordinator that wants to stay. Like, let's say Dan Campbell was not staying with the Lions for whatever reason, and they're bringing in a head coach, and both Glenn and Ben Johnson wanted to stay. I don't like, those are 2 top coordinators. So like, though, that's a different situation here. I would prefer that if somebody comes in, that they get the choice of who they want at OC, who they want at DC, because ultimately they're going to be the ones that are judged if something doesn't work. And you don't want there to be well, this coach was forced on this guy. Look, if a head coach comes in and they have a past relationship with Thomas Brown, and they like Thomas Brown and think that he is a good coach, and if it's an offensive guy and they're going to call the plays and Thomas Brown is okay not to do that, I don't think he will. Once he gets to start to call plays, he's going to want to do that again. But if there is that situation, I think that's the only viable chance that he stays. I think for me, it's very simple. Whoever you want to bring in, you're bringing in them to be your head coach. If you trust them to be your head coach, trust them to hire their own coordinators.
It's very much like what we just talked about with the players and the head coaches, in terms of trust your players, right? Bring in your players and then trust them to do what you brought them in to do. It's no different for a coaching staff. And there's a lot of factors at play here. It's nothing against Thomas Brown. I hope he has a great year, because this is him building his resume for the rest of the league and saying, hey, the last time I was an interim OC didn't go great. This time it went a lot better. I learned my lessons, and that gives me another shot as being hired as an OC full time, or eventually, like you said, a shot at the top job. Even if he does that, there are a whole lot of factors out of his control here. One is you bring in somebody to be the head coach. It is a clean slate. This is their potentially their one shot to be an NFL head coach. They want control over as many of those variables as are possible. And they've built coaching relationships over their entire tenure. Who knows if they were, a graduate assistant at a college 15, 20 years ago, and they sat around talking about, can you imagine if either one of us ever ends up as a head coach? That guy's probably going to be on their staff, right or wrong. That's the way it works. It's a relationship business, and there's that at play. The other is the accountability and clean slate piece of, I didn't inherit anything. I came in, you said I have control of the football operation, so I took control of the football operation, and I got everything that I wanted. On offense, on defense, for my assistants, everything else. I don't have any excuses. The one tiny little envelope of a chance I can see Thomas Brown sticking around is if the offense does very well, Caleb is clicking and he speaks highly of him with whoever the presumptive head coach is. If that coach comes from a defensive background, and again, he has a prior relationship or knowledge of Brown, and he sits down with Thomas Brown and says, hey, you took us out of the doldrums. We actually started sailing in the right direction, but now I'm going to need you to go up 2 notches with this. Are you 100% sure you can do that? And believes and trusts in that answer, which there's a lot of ifs there. That would be the one narrow slice where it could happen. I think the likelihood of that is less than 1%. And it has nothing to do with Thomas Brown as a head coach. It has everything to do with the politics and hiring of a head coach and the expectations and how they're judged. So great question. I really appreciate that one, Elliot. That's going to bring us to our guest segment of the week. And we are going to talk even more Caleb and quarterback development. And yes, quite a bit of the change to Thomas Brown. I had an opportunity to bring Tim Jenkins on this week. And again, great guest because he's got history with the Bears for the past couple of years. He's seen the offensive, I'll call it loosely, progression with Chicago. And he's had to put up with the same thing all of us have had to put up with for the first half of this year. Got to see the change. It felt like the perfect opportunity to bring Tim on. So you'll see that interview right here. This week on Bear Era, we are incredibly fortunate to have Tim Jenkins, former NFL QB, founder and CEO of Jenkins Elite Passing Camps. Tim, how are you this week?
I'm doing great. How are you guys doing?
We're happy to have you on after a good Caleb game. Yeah. That was really our whole objective, is to make sure that we had something fun to talk about. We weren't sure it was going to be this soon. Luckily, the switch to Thomas Brown seems to have yielded a whole bunch of early and low-hanging fruit for this offense. We'll talk about that. But Ciaran, I'm going to give you the first crack for the question for Tim. And then, of course, as always, we'll open up the floor for him to ask us one about the Bears.
First of all, welcome to the podcast, Tim. And I just want to say, as someone who is a lifelong Bears fan, we understand your pain because you have adopted the Bears for some strange reason. We've had to deal with this our entire lives. But with that being said, it's always great to kind of listen to you talk about quarterbacks, kind of diagnose certain things that the offense is doing. And obviously, as EJ mentioned, there was a big change this week. So OC goes out, and then basically from Tuesday to Sunday, there's a big change, new offensive coordinator. And I guess for the fans that don't go into depth of what the quarterback is doing or what an offense is doing, how can you diagnose the real change that happened from just Shane Waldron? It's still his offense, just it's being called differently, to what Thomas Brown was able to do. What did you see that you were impressed with from first week of Thomas Brown calling plays?
Yeah, so I think I want to separate Thomas Brown out for this first comment because it's nothing against him. But the fact that it took us 11 weeks to get DJ Moore the ball, like, consistently, when I don't know about you guys, it feels like every time I turn on the tape and watch DJ Moore play, it takes 5 people and a water boy to get him down, right? Like, it's just like he is a competitive guy. He's cut way closer to the Debo cloth, I think, than like a true receiver, right? Like when I watch him run the football, I think like mix a running back, receiver. So to me, I want to remove Thomas Brown because it's not an insult to him. It's just like funny that like we have this playmaker. And of course, it's 11 weeks into the year that we finally actually get him the ball in space. So to me, that's one of them, right? Is finding creative ways to get DJ Moore the ball. I think the second one was getting Cole Kmet involved, which I think fans and analysts and everybody kind of has been screaming about, not because everyone thinks like, I don't think Kmet's like this all-world tight end, right? Like, I'm not like hey, he's Antonio Gates reincarnated, right? Like, that's not where he is, but he's a quality target in the National Football League. So we had just kind of like shoved him to the side for a while. So seeing him get back involved. And then I think just like a really great dose of the run game. I think getting the ball out of Caleb's hand quickly. If you were going to say like, hey, Tim, what's the one critique? I thought he called a really darn good game. Any criticism would be, hey, I think a couple more boots. I really love Caleb Williams in true boot action, right? Don't block the D end. Really, and I know, right, he gets whacked on the one, so everyone's like, really, you want more of that? But it's like, I do think boot action is great for him. I would like a little more creativity with it because, you know, some of the NFL, you see these guys, they're like pulling guards with the naked action, which to me, I think is like, I had never seen it before a couple of years ago. And now it seems like every time I see it, the D in full on bite. So I'd like to see some of that. And then I think a true 2 or 3 just true shot plays, right? Hard play action, really try to take the roof off it. We have Rome, we've got DJ, we got Keenan Allen. We paid these guys a lot of dough. Let's stretch the field vertically, even if we think, hey, that's maybe Caleb's worst part of his game so far as a pro. Throwing them still backs people off a little bit. So other than that, I just think he did a really great job, I think, utilizing the personnel the way they should be. And it's always so hard because I think Shane was such low-hanging fruit to go after. And part of me wants to also understand it. We've all worked jobs, right, where you don't agree with your boss, but he's your boss, so you got to go in a certain direction. I do think what you kind of saw from Shane was like the mentality of, hey, we're ending drives with a kick. We play complementary football. Like you saw a lot of, I don't know the correct word for it, like uncompetitive grit to me is like, hey, we'd rather lose a close game than try to actually win and fail. That's more or less what you saw. And I just don't think we saw that this week. I thought he called a really efficient game, a couple more shot plays. And then obviously, we're one field goal away from beating a team that has a heck of a lot better year than we have so far.
Yeah, I think all the things you said there are true. And it is, we're talking about a low bar. This is literally the bar sitting on the ground in terms of what we had to hop over to see this week. And I feel like a lot of what we saw from Thomas Brown on Sunday was a lot of common sense additions that many people, not just us, have been calling for. I know we talked to JT O'Sullivan earlier on the podcast. Like everybody's been saying, hey, there are certain things that don't match. And some of the things he matched were the proper receiver skill sets to the routes. You talked about DJ Moore getting the ball at all, but getting the ball in a proper way. Like DJ Moore is a great yak threat. He's really good in space. Do you always want him running, 5-yard hook? You don't. That's not going to be great for him. Get him moving, get him in space, utilize that competitive skill set he's got. Better use of Roschon Johnson in the run game. They were pretty much DeAndre Swift or bust. It was all bust for the first 3 weeks. Then they finally figured out to get him in space, but there are plenty of meat left on the bone here for Roschon Johnson, who is both a tough inside runner and a good screen receiver. We saw more of that. That felt much more balanced. And then a screen game that wasn't just dead on arrival. Like the screen game for the Bears has been, I don't know how you feel about it, but whenever I have to watch it, I think I would rather gouge my eyes out with a spoon. And this last week, it actually seemed like they set it up for some success. So now that he stopped the free fall, because that's really what it was, this was a team in complete turmoil, and he basically set this lowest common denominator bar of like, we'll do all the basic stuff and see if it works. And it did. What do you think is next? Where are they going to push? Where are they going to try and flip some levers to get some more of those elements you were just talking about? What do you think's next on the to-do list?
To me, the number one priority is like true run action shots, right? Hey, sell the run action up front, not pass pro up front, and the running back and quarterback, like true run action shot plays. And and then obviously walking Caleb through this. Hey, if we're pulling a guard, we're running true power pass. There's a good shot. You're moving your spot, right? Like that's just the reality of run action shots in the NFL. You're moving off your spot. You're throwing it away half the time. The other half of the time, you're gashing them for 35 yards, right? Like that is what it is. But I think that's a needed element, especially with the fact of we have a hard time holding up in true just 4-on-5 pass pro. So why the heck not see if we can pull somebody and fool some people, right? To me, that's kind of like where I'd like to see it go. The other thing I would really like to see is the run and play action screen game, right? You hinted at the screen game was improved, whether it be quick outside to DJ or to the running back. We saw it once, right? We saw the true slow, we call it a slow screen, but to me, it's like, I don't like the true antiquated version of, hey, it looks like we're running stick and then we're running slip screen. I love where it's hard play action. You've got the receivers downfield running like machete, right? Double deep over. And then, boom, we get back to our running back after faking it to him. Because what you get from the linebacker is run, run, run. Oh, shoot, it's pass. Oh, shoot, right? It's run, right? You get the bluey biscuits, right? Everybody's yelling biscuits out there trying to catch up to it. So to me, it's like, I really like stuff like that. Those would be the two things that if you're like, hey, what could we push for, ASAP, it would be that. Obviously, with Flores coming to town, I do think like maybe 2 of the run action shots, right? Because they're going to heat him up. Like if there's anything I could say going into this week, we're going to get so many dang pressures. It's not even funny because I think the Bears did a better job protecting this weekend. But I also think to me, it felt like on film, and like who knows what the stats actually say. It felt like we were getting into condensed sets a lot, which if you're a D coordinator, condensed sets sometimes force you off the ball. It makes coverage tougher. So usually your answer is, okay, hey, you want to pack the box? We're going to disguise the hell out of some of these pressures. With Flores, it kind of feels like a perfect recipe for what he's going to want to bring to town. I think you start condensed. We used to call it scatter, but you scatter shift into more of a spread, getting it empty, see what you think, who's communicating. Is it the Sam yelling back in or the Will to kind of know, okay, hey, we felt like they were going to bring weak pressure here or strong. Make sure you have eyes on it, right? Recognizing, okay, hey, get a couple of QCs knowing, okay, the Sam was talking on this one, so we can relay that to the rookie. But to me, it's like I do think that's what I'd like to see it push for. The thing that I would like to see, I want to call it like short to long term over the next few weeks, is that next step for Caleb from like tying his footwork to the route, right? Because I do think that's something that a lot of people are starting to talk about. Of okay, hey, his footwork, it kind of looks funky to these concepts, and I do believe that. And the other thing that I like want to touch on for a second is quarterbacks have to take ownership over certain things in the National Football League. The footwork thing for me for Caleb is one of those that I'm not sure he's even capable of, and I don't mean that as an insult for Caleb, but I mean it from like no one when he was coming out of USC, no one was like, man, you know what, his footwork's pristine. And I guarantee if you go back to Gonzaga High School, right, those coaches were just like more or less like, let's not mess this kid up, right? Like how often do you get Caleb Williams as a high school quarterback? That's a gift, right? You could take 4 years off and you're probably going to be pretty dang good. You know what I mean? So to me, it's like, I don't think he's ever been super held accountable to that. And that's something I'd like to see. From what you hear about Thomas Brown, he's a pretty direct, good quality coach. Like I would like to see him be direct with Caleb, and I'd like to see his footwork take a step in the right direction, because we can say all we want about Mahomes and Josh Allen and like, oh, look, they became accurate over this time. And like, I get it, right? Josh became a more rotational thrower and people want to nerd out over the biomechanics, right? But the biomechanics were a piece of it. His footwork looked a hell of a lot different too, year 3, year 4 than it did in years 1, year 2. And it's like, everybody talks about the 4th and 1 play, scrambles around, beats the Chiefs. But what we miss on is, okay, hey, every time they're running, we used to call it X-Mag, where they have the in runner with the option route underneath. Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen every time take a 1 skip drop in the gun. What does Caleb Williams do? 3 hitch. Why? Right? Everyone on planet Earth takes it as a 1 skip. We somehow decided to take it as a 3 hitch. I don't know if it's Caleb freewheeling it, right? Or if that's what Shane wanted. Like, to me, it's like, those are the red flags that I do hope someone pours the right stuff into him, because ultimately it's Caleb who's going to get ran out of town if he doesn't fix it, right? Like at some point we stop blaming coordinators and everyone else. And I would love to see him really like lean in with somebody, or them get someone in building who actually cares about that. But that's the one thing where it's like, I do think they can fix it in the short term if it's a focus point. And I hope it is with the kind of change that we've seen with Thomas Brown.
Yeah, it's hard to say what was going on in that building. I know a lot of people were sort of taking stabs at it, but they were all stabs in the dark for all of us. None of us were in that room. And there was a lot of stuff that was going on that didn't work together. And so sorting through, sort of sifting through that wreckage and seeing what was part of what was being called, what was maybe just like you said, organically happening because nobody said anything about it. And like organizing those things is a lot of, I would imagine, what the staff is doing this week, because last week it was a short week, didn't take over till midweek. And it was like, look, we got a game to play.
Typical Bears fashion, right? Not only are we switching coordinator, but we're switching him on Tuesday.
Right. We're not doing it Sunday night to give anybody a break or a head start. We're going to keep a competitive advantage by switching on Wednesday. No. And, I would imagine they're getting a chance to dig back into that and sort of, get to the second level or third level stuff that they want to prioritize. And again, weeks in the NFL, this feel pretty short, no matter if they're a long week or a short week. There's a lot to do in a short period of time. So I'm sure some of those things are going to get earmarked and say, well, we don't have to do that to win this week. What we want to do is keep Caleb upright against a Flores blitz scheme. So we'll prioritize that, but it'll be really interesting to see, like you said, sort of short to medium term, what happens 3 weeks from now, 4 weeks from now. What do we see improvement? Where do we see things not changing? That's going to be fascinating to watch with the Bears, because what happened in the first half of the season was very hard to understand and justify. We'll just say that. But speaking of things that are
That's
hard to
being nice.
understand, yeah, that's being kind. Speaking of things that are hard to understand, what's your question for the Bears for us?
Yeah, so first and foremost, I've got to give you guys like your due because I've joked about this. I've only been really like doing Bear stuff for like 3 years, right? Since Justin Fields. And I remember my first thing I put out there, and I'm looking on Twitter, X or whatever, and I'm like, damn, people are responding. They either love me or they just think I'm the worst guy ever. I'm like, why is everybody so angry? And then now after living through it for 3 years of like rooting for the Bears and like my 8-year-old, right, he's starting to get into it. We're hurting with them, you know? And then unfortunately for me, you know, the whole like doing the YouTube breakdowns is a side gig for me, right? So I'm like, I bet all my YouTube earnings on the Bears. So I'm really hurting with the people, you know? So it's like, I've been working for free a lot for the Bears, but I got to give you guys that. And with that, my biggest question, I think, for you guys is, I think we all know like Ben Johnson, right? Of like, you got to assume Flu's dead man walking, right? We got to assume that we're going in a different direction. If not, like none of us we can't keep doing it, right? So, but if he does get let go, where do you see it? I know Ben Johnson's like a popular name. Is there anyone else in your guys' head where you're like, I think this is a great fit from just knowing what you know about Chicago, the organization, what you see with Caleb? What do you guys kind of think on where the Bears go from here?
EJ, you want me to take this first?
Yeah, I'll let you have the first crack, Ciaran. I know you've got some thoughts brewing.
Yeah, look, I've kind of had the same conversation with a couple of people because I've put out some kind of tweets in terms of everyone talks about Ben Johnson, and the likelihood is that probably won't happen. So I kind of went back to the year when Eberflus did get hired, and you had a lot of guys go off the board really, really early. But everybody seems to forget who the last coach was that was hired that year, and that was Kevin O'Connell for the Minnesota Vikings. And I tried to kind of go into it as who is a guy that not everybody is talking about, but maybe people should talk a little bit more about him. And it seems like one of the guys has been lost in the wind, who was kind of that name maybe 2 years ago, was Joe Brady from the Buffalo Bills. And you look at, obviously, we got to see what the game between the Bills and the Chiefs. And I think the more we're getting to see this year, because the Bills were a little bit in flux at the start of the year, lost a lot of guys, but that offense still looks pretty good. And it helps when you have a guy like Josh Allen. But I like the resume that Joe Brady has. I like the fact that he has been in different roles. He's not going to be like one of those guys, I think, really early on in his coaching circle that everybody's going to be circling around, but he deserves to get those interviews because I think he is good. I like the fact that he does have some principles in terms of his offense that I think will fit quite well with Caleb. I like kind of the quick passing game that he does have there. He uses Josh Allen's mobility, which is something we saw this week, where it seems like we didn't get to see much of that from Caleb. It was stay in the pocket no matter what. And I would rather have a guy that knows what he wants in terms of the offense, but also wants to cater it to the strengths of the quarterback and the playmakers. And that's what I liked about what he has brought to the Bills this year. Because look, last year everybody was talking about, I think it was last year, the year before, like Ken Dorsey coming in with the Bills, and then suddenly he goes because it wasn't working. Well, you have a guy in Joe Brady who comes in, and obviously he's been with them, but he's able to instill this offense that did have a lot of change. Obviously, the most important part of it was that Josh Allen stays healthy, that offense can keep rolling. Well, the run game isn't at the top of the league. You look at kind of some of the key things that he's been able to do. Kind of, you mentioned it, you want to see the Bears get a little bit more vertical. He does that for the Bills, but also has some of those spread principles that we look for, the quick game, the play action. And as I heard you speaking about what you want to see from Caleb, I was just doing kind of some research on some of these guys coming into this week, and I'm like, that makes sense. That's someone that I don't think people have been talking about as a link to the Bears, but I wouldn't be surprised if come the end of the year, Bill's probably going to get into the playoffs, probably going to look pretty good, that his name starts to creep up with a lot of those teams. So he's one of the guys that I think his name speaks out to me. I don't think it's, like I said, I don't think he's going to have the same popularity as a Ben Johnson and stuff, but it might be one of those where he might be one of the last guys hired, but could end up being one of the better guys that gets hired.
Yeah, I would agree that Brady's name is going to be out there. A lot of people are going to say they think he's probably 1 year too early for the head job because head coaching job has a lot more to it than just calling an offense, but his offense and his adaptability has been really good. I wouldn't be sad at all about that. Guys I look at, Zach Robinson, done a great job with the Atlanta offense, finally sort of brought to fruition all the promise of that offense. Unfortunately for him, the Falcons defense can't play a lick this year. Not his fault. Don't know how he's going to be in the room. Know a couple people who know him, and they seem to be very confident that that next step is probably not too big for him. He's also been around the league in a bunch of different systems, which is always handy to a head coach when you're assembling a staff. And the dark horse for me would be Drew Petzing out of Arizona. I really like a lot of his concepts. I liked him last year as he came in with Gannon. I think Arizona football has this weird cloaking device that just nobody cares about it. Nobody watches it. Nobody talks about it. But if you dug in at the beginning of last year before the Cardinals fell off, some really interesting stuff in the first half of the year from Drew Petzing. He's continued it this year, even though everybody has tape of it, which is another mark of a good coach in terms of adjustments. And now you see the development from Kyler and the passing offense really mid-season starting to boost Arizona's stock. They're going to be a tough out in the playoffs. So I think it should at least get him some interviews. I don't know the first thing about Drew as a person, as a coach in the room, which is a big deal when you're going for head coaching opportunities. But those are sort of three guys between Brady, Zach Robinson, and Drew Petzing, I think should be on your list at least to talk to as you go to the next steps. Maybe one of them turns your crank, but I think, Ben Johnson, we're in agreement, is going to command top of market. He's going to be able to write his own ticket. And for right now, we really don't think in the current, ownership climate that the Bears are going to be willing to cash that particular ticket financially. So we'll see how that goes. But, Ben would be great. But at the same time, we realize the reality. He's probably not going to be the guy.
I think Zach Robinson's a good one. Because if you go back to even just last year from when they were going OCs, like he was one of the guys that they brought in, and there was a lot of rumors afterwards that he was kind of one of the finalists there to get that job. So they already know what he's like as an interviewee or a guy in terms of they would have done their homework on him as a person, his offense, and then seeing what he's been able to do with the Atlanta Falcons. I wouldn't be surprised if he gets an interview with the Bears because he did last year. They were interested enough in him then. So that's definitely going to be an intriguing one. And I think what might actually benefit the Bears if they do want an offensive guy, the fact that they were interviewing a lot of these OCs this year that are becoming the hot names for potential head coaching candidates, you kind of have that in terms of you've met with them before.
Yeah, that's dead on. You think it has to be an offensive guy?
No. No.
I don't think it does, but if you get the defensive guy, it so has to work. It's just added pressure, Tim, right? If you bring a defensive guy in and he's a good head coach, like that's a hard enough jump to make. It's almost to me like the jump for a player between college and the pros, right? The difference between coordinating in the NFL and being responsible for everything, the buck stops here as a head coach, is a huge one. And if you bring in a defensive guy with all the history in Chicago of both defensive excellence and offensive struggles, and the offense doesn't work for whoever he brings with him, like that's it. It's over 1 year, like burn down Hallis Hall. It's so hard. Whereas, I think if you bring in an offensive guy, there's a little more leash there. Not a lot, as you've experienced from all the fans in your mentions, just a wee bit, but there's so much pressure for the offense to be good, especially with Caleb, right? As goes Caleb, so goes the Bears. That's the deal right now. So it is the paramount thing for the franchise, not just for the offense, but for the franchise, that he does well and excels. And if you bring in a defensive guy and that doesn't happen for whatever reason, as you know, there's a million variables that have to go right. Yep. But if any of them fail and defense is attached to the head coach again, I'm not sure how much runway that's going to get.
For my biggest thing is who can a coach bring in with them? Because I look at Eberflus and where he's failed the most is he he can't put together a staff. He's had to get rid of guys for many different reasons, and like you look at what the Lions have done, everybody made fun of when they hired Dan Campbell, but what has he been able to do? He's put together a top class staff around him, and that's what you kind of hope for. And it's no surprise that some of the guys that for the Bears when they have done well, so like for example, when Nagy came in, that first year was really good. Well, what was kind of one of the key principles there that helped them get to that point? It was the defense. Who was the coach? Vic Fangio. Then suddenly Fangio goes and the whole thing goes to crap. So like for me, my preference would be an offensive guy, because I do want somebody to be able to build with Caleb and not worry that that guy's going to be gone in a year's time. But I would say that if there's a defensive guy, a special teams guy, I don't really care if they can get you on board with the staff they're going to bring in and you can get behind that. I don't think that's a problem, because at the end of the day, you do want somebody that can be a head coach. You don't want to get an offensive guy that comes in and, as EJ said, can't command the room, can't be that guy that can galvanize the locker room, because that's what this team needs with everything they've gone through this year. They need a guy that can come in, galvanize that locker room, but also a guy that everybody within the organization can respect. Ideal is that it would be an offensive guy, but I don't think that needs to be a requirement. For a lot of fans, it'll be a requirement, but I think for the Bears, it doesn't need to be a requirement.
Yeah, the end all be all for the head coach is that they are good at being a head coach, and that entails a lot of different things. But Eberflus has had his failings, and assembling a staff has been one of them. We've seen now either 9 coordinator assistants move on during his tenure, and not necessarily to be hired somewhere else. So that's a problem. That's something you can't repeat in the next head coaching hire. Tim, thank you so much for taking time this week. We really appreciate you taking a chunk out of your busy schedule and joining us here on Bear Era. Tell everybody where they can find your stuff.
Yeah, just on YouTube at All Things QB, and then on Twitter at T Jenkins Elite. I don't really check anything else, so I think that's
if you want to reach Tim, those are the 2 places. Anyways, can't thank you enough for coming on, lending your insight. As always, great to have you. We'll have you back.
I appreciate you, fellas. Thank you so much.
So great to be able to have Tim on after a good Caleb performance. That was an important one for us. We knew we wanted to have him on the show. We were just looking for the right opportunity. And surprisingly, that opportunity came against the Packers. I know you've had Tim on your other show as well. What are your thoughts on Tim and what he brings?
Yeah, Tim is great. I love his enthusiasm about him being a newfound Bears fan, I guess we'll say it in terms of going through it. He obviously started when he started doing breakdowns of quarterbacks. He did a breakdown of Justin Fields, and he got all the responses from Bears fans because we love our team, we love our quarterbacks. But really, I think I just like listening to him talk about kind of what makes up the offense, what he wants to see. It's kind of similar to what we from JT, who was on the show a couple of weeks ago. It's always good to have those guys on because, like, to a point, they don't really have a biased view because they're just looking at what the quarterback is doing, what the offense is doing, what they want to see from the offense, and kind of some of the things that JT said a couple of weeks ago. We kind of have seen where Thomas Brown incorporated it a little bit, and now we're hearing Tim say he wants to see even more of that. So you're seeing 2 guys that we've had on the podcast here say what they want to see from this Bears offense, and I think it's a lot of the things that us as fans want to see them do more of, and we got to see that little snippet of it against the Packers, and it'll be interesting to see over the next couple of weeks what can Thomas Brown put together to try and bring more of those kind of chunk plays, the big passing plays downfield, but also getting Caleb out a little bit. Like Tim mentioned it, get him out on actual boots, like get him out there, and so that you get to see, because you look at Caleb and you get to see that athleticism, but really every time that he's running, he's constantly looking down the field, and he's very good at it. And I think one thing that Thomas Brown did, play to the strengths of the offense. So play to the strengths of your main guy on offense in Caleb Williams. And if we can do that, I think you're going to see some more surprising performances that people kind of wrote off this offense overall. And if we're being honest with ourselves, they're the reason the Bears should have won. And it's unfortunate for Caleb, but the fact that he was able to do that and the offense was able to do that it's a positive moving forward, because it's something that I don't think we were going to be able to say just a few weeks ago.
Feels like a huge obstacle has been removed from the Bears' path, and having a guy like Tim on who's played the position, and JT, same thing, having those guys on the podcast and having them tell us what they see through their eyes as former players, as analysts, is invaluable to us. So tremendous thanks to both of them. Somebody else who's got something they want to see on the field this week is Mike Mercado, our super producer. Every week we give him a minute to tell you what he's focusing on for the upcoming week, and that is our Mike on the Mic segment, and it's next.
As always, thank you, EJ and Ciaran. And Bears fans, when it rains, it pours. And things don't get any easier after that heartbreaker against Green Bay, with Minnesota coming into town. And here we are highlighting the matchup between Brian Flores, the defensive coordinator of the Minnesota Vikings, versus Thomas Brown, the offensive coordinator for the Chicago Bears. See, even though Minnesota has given up 170 points this season, they have only given up 744 rushing yards and 4 rushing touchdowns. Basically, it's going to be a long day for DeAndre Swift and Roschon Johnson. But the Bears can score on this defense, and it will have to be through the air. See, the Vikings have allowed 2,348 passing yards and 15 passing touchdowns. It's going to come down to the coaching staff and Caleb Williams to get the ball to their playmakers and put the ball in the end zone to put 6 points on the scoreboard. And it's going to be on Thomas Brown and the offensive line coach and the offensive line themselves to protect Caleb Williams. See, in 10 games, Caleb has been blitzed 90 times, has been hurried 31 times, pressured 94 times, and hit 22 times. You know, Brian Flores, being one of the great defensive minds in the NFL, is going to have disguises and throw blitz that Caleb has never seen. They are going to have an uphill battle against this defense. But if they could get the ball in the air, in their playmakers, the Bears can walk away after a tough loss to Green Bay with an awesome victory against Minnesota. That's what we're highlighting here on Mike and the Mic. Now back to EJ and Ciaran.
Speaking of enthusiasm and an unbiased, well, very biased Bears fans view, that's why we love Mike. That's why we give him the spot every week. Always great to hear his thoughts. Really happy that all of you have taken this ride with us. Cheers and thanks to our sponsors, Homage. Of course, the link's down at the bottom of the screen. Click on the QR code. Oh, you repping your NFL jam? Oh, very nice. Caleb and Rome, we love it. Again, if you use the QR link at the bottom of the screen, we get a cut of anything you buy, whether it's Bears gear or not. Probably should be Bears gear. Come on, you know you want it. So buy yourself some. Say it's a gift from somebody at the office. It'll work great. And Blue Wire Podcasts, where you can hear all of our audio podcasts. And leave your thoughts down in the comments. We love to hear from you every week. The interaction with fans is one of the reasons we do this, and gives us ideas for future podcasts as well. So if you have guests you'd like us to bring on, or topics you'd like us to tackle here on Bear Era, drop them in the comments. We read those every week. Can't thank you enough for following along, liking, commenting, just viewing. And of course, if you're not subscribed already, do that now so you can make sure not to miss anything we're going to create for you here on Bear Era. With that, we will see you next week.